Welcome to our enlightening session tonight. Our enlightening session usually is on Wednesday evening for 1 hour, so it's an online session. And today's topic is Cybersecurity Career Path. And I'm very delighted to introduce our speaker for tonight, Cuneyt Karul. How many of you already know RSA conference? So RSA conference is considered as the top cybersecurity conference in the whole world. And the speaker who can present at that conference usually means you are the industry expert. So on their experts page, you can find our speaker tonight, Cuneyt from BlueCat. He currently is the Director of Information Security and Compliance at BlueCat. You can read his bio there. In a nutshell, he has a 2 decades experience in kind of I also share a little bit a similar background with Cuneyt in the start with the software development. And recently, I also came across his talk on the RSA talk. It's about the objective-oriented approach to information security policy management, which is very interesting to me as a technical people to looking at non-technical way of cybersecurity. Really is how to manage the policy, kind of think policy from software development or architecture way. So that's a very interesting thing. Really is eye-opening to look at the same thing, which also tells you Cuneyt have a lot of insights and his creativity and his deep insights and looking the things from different angles. So you will definitely benefit a lot of his insight tonight.
So I prepared just 5-6 pages, and my agenda is I will talk about myself just a little bit. Actually, I don't like doing that personally, but I just wanted you to see where I came to this position today. I am in. It was over 2 decades, and I know some of you might have different backgrounds. So I just wanted to share my experience with you as is, so you can maybe draw some parallels. The second title is cybersecurity the right career for me? I got a lot of questions. I meet with people from all walks of life. They ask me this question. I'll try to answer that. And what do cybersecurity professionals do? Some people actually know, have a good idea. Some people don't. And again, what background is best for a career in cybersecurity? I'll try to answer this from my perspective. And of course, the big questions: certifications, diplomas, degrees. Which one is better? Do we need them? How do we get them? And finally, if you're bought in, sold to the idea of a cybersecurity career, like where do I start? How do I start? In a nutshell, what I'll talk about. And I'll try to keep this 15 tops 20 minutes, and then I'm open to your questions. So please feel free to ask whatever you want. So when I was little, I was into music, arts, and science, kind of all together. And since arts and science did not look like a good career path for my parents, I ended up, going to the sciences, and I studied environmental engineering. And during my master's and PhD, actually, I was introduced to computers. Up until then, I was not very into computers. They were just coming out. So between the years of 92 and 99, I actually had to write a lot of code during my master's and PhD, because what I did for my degrees were numerical analysis and simulation. It required me to understand and learn coding. My PhD was on artificial intelligence, which I had to write a lot of code in Pascal and C, and then finally MATLAB. So that's how I actually got into coding. And then I worked as a researcher. I was a scientist between the years of 92 and 94 doing my master's. And then I jumped to a science organization. And then I was a kind of researcher there as well. That's how I started my career. And then in 1995, I did something very dumb. I actually walked into a bank and got a credit loan and started a company with my current wife. And that was not a very smart thing to do, but we learned a lot. And initially, we were not planning on doing internet or coding. It was more an engineering company. But then internet exploded at that time, and we actually became one of the first ISPs in Turkey, which is where I'm from. And there, I started writing code professionally. In addition to what I was doing at school, I actually got projects, and I ended up writing a lot of code. And then I moved to Canada, and my goal was to get a postdoc position and become a scientist. But again, I I moved in at such a time that the dot-com boom was like literally exploding. In 2 weeks, I got a job as a software developer, and they paid me quite good for a starting position. So my science career basically stopped there, and then I became a full-time software developer. And I worked as a software developer, and then a team lead, and then a software architect, and I ended up being a vice president of research and development for companies of like 10 people to 10,000 people. I worked in different positions in different companies. And to be very frank, I learned how to write code with others in Canada, because in Turkey it was my company. I wrote something and people paid me. So I learned project management side of things, architecture side of things. So I learned a lot. I learned new languages. Java just was coming out, and I became Java expert, and that's where I did my career. So this is pre cybersecurity. And what happened is, in 2005, I got an offer from a company called EchoWorks, which is still up and running. It's one of the actually big encryption companies. I did not join there because I was in security, but I was the vice president of architecture, and I developed products and ran teams. And as part of that job, I actually, that was my first deep exposure to cybersecurity. And back in the day, cybersecurity was not as it was today. It was still a kind of emerging market, and it was more technical than social. And my job was very technical. I worked with encryption, with public key infrastructure, hardware security modules. We worked with different HSNs. I actually wrote the APIs myself. And then I did a lot of hands-on Java crypto coding, and I managed a team of up to 20 people, testers. So it was a very, very good job that I learned really a lot about security, and I really enjoyed that job a lot. And we invented patents. I think I have 4 co-inventor patents, mostly related to cybersecurity, email communication, that kind of stuff. So as a technical person, it was a very fulfilling job. But again, I don't know why. I also had a dream of doing high frequency trading. So I got an offer, and a broker dealer offered me to write a software platform for them, and make billions of dollars. So I was not after the money. I really loved the challenge, and I jumped to that position. I started a company and started working with this broker dealer. And I actually wrote an entire trading platform, and we traded with the New York Stock Exchange, Toronto. It was a very, very challenging job technically. Like you couldn't make a mistake, because whenever you made a mistake, you lost a lot of money. I did a couple of times, and it was not fun. So I was also responsible for the information security and compliance, because when you're working with stock exchanges, they are very strict about their disaster recovery, business continuity planning. So I got that side of my experience in cybersecurity in this job. I was basically, doing drills with Toronto Stock Exchange in the weekends. We were doing test trades and all that stuff. And of course, we were actually, we had a data center. We were hosting our servers. So the networking and server farm side of things I learned there as well. But it was a very stressful job. And after a while, I decided that I don't need more money in my life, and I wanted to do something really I enjoyed a lot. And I remember that InfoSec was really something I loved a lot. And I made a decision to go back full-time to cybersecurity. When I did that, I got my CISSP and RESILIA certifications. RESILIA is not very well known. CISSP, you probably have all heard about it. It's ISE Square certification, which is pretty much the industry standard. RESILIA is part of Untitled, which is big in Europe and UK. It was just coming to North America, and I just happened to have vouchers and wrote the exam, studied 2 weeks, and it has a different view of cybersecurity, but I got them during my last job. And once I got my certifications, I got an offer from BlueCat, and they were looking for a chief security architect. They were just coming out with a new product. They needed security backgrounded people who also wrote software. So I was hired, but my role changed very, very fast. In about a year, they also needed a person who is in charge of cybersecurity for the entire company. And my role changed from being somewhat technical to almost no technical at all. And I kind of agreed to do that because I wanted to challenge myself. I wanted to get out of my comfort zone, which is very technical. And in the meantime, after I worked there a couple of years, I recently got my CISM certification, which is an ISACA certification, which is more on the information security management side of things, just to get a better understanding of this, non-technical part of it. And and in the meantime, I became quite active in this cybersecurity community, and that's one of the reasons why I love my job, is because my company is very, very generous about sending me to conferences for speaking engagements, local and all over the world. And every now and then I send papers. If I get accepted, I just go present at conferences, and I like that a lot. It kind of reminds me of my old scientist days. Probably that's why I like this job a lot. So let's get back to your potential questions. Is cybersecurity the right career for me? I know some of you are already in cybersecurity, so please excuse my puns and stuff. But first of all, that's a good question. That's where anybody should start. And first of all, do you really know what cybersecurity career looks like? Because I had 2 interns, and sometimes I do student shadowing programs. I did with Ryerson University. I kind of talk to many young people or people who wants to change their career, and I've observed many of them do not actually know what a cybersecurity person does all day long, and sometimes they're disappointed. Sometimes they find it really cool. But regardless of what you find, I think you should really do a good research, understand, and learn more about it, and understand what a cybersecurity person do. So first of all, you're here in this call, which is a good start. Thank you for joining and listening to me, Ryan, today, and talk to people for advice. And I am giving you my full blessing that you can reach out to me. And some of you probably in this call already did. And I will be happy to try to help you as much as I can. Just be considerate of my time or other people that you reach out to. But I found most people in this industry will happily, gladly help you out. Please show some guidance. Research and learn. Go search for certifications, what people do, and that is a good way of understanding what are different types of cybersecurity careers out there. And then socializing, get involved. Again, joining this call is one of them. I actually did this once I made the decision to move full-time. I attended ISC Square events. I did ISACA events. I went to conferences if I could afford them, or if there were local events, free events, online events. I basically tried to, and after a while you realize there is a small group of people, and I would say I probably know half of them by now. So it is always good to socialize. Another thing is I get a lot of questions. What do I do? What certification? I think a very good place to start is check job descriptions. And if you see a job that you say, hey, I really like that job, this is just for me, and see what the employers are looking for. And I'm not only talking about your education or certification, they actually describe the role to you in that job. See if that's something you really want to do and that's something you are passionate about. That's a very good place to start. Also, keep in mind that this is an emerging field that evolves fast. It changed so much in the last 15 years, and it is changing every day. It doesn't mean that whatever I told you today is going to be correct in like 2 years, maybe. So always keep in touch with people and try to understand where it's going. And there are many different paths you can follow. So I'm going to talk about them in my next slide. So what do cybersecurity professionals do? That's a very good question. And it's usually, people usually have a very narrow view of what cybersecurity people do. We do a lot of things, but not everybody does everything. There are some jobs that actually is very limited to one thing. So this is actually how CISSP separates domains. I'm not saying this is the kind of ultimate guide. It is not. But CISSP is one of those certifications that is pretty widespread. It gives you a pretty broad idea of different things you can do with cybersecurity. And I think their percentages of weights in the final exam gives you a pretty good idea of what percent do we do in what field. Security and risk management is kind of the policies, that kind of stuff, which I struggled the most because being an engineer and a scientist, if something doesn't have a math, it was very hard for me to understand. Security engineering, I was comfortable with cryptography, communication, network, and security. Again, I worked in email security, so I kind of thought I knew networking quite well. But when I started doing CISSP, I figured out actually I am lacking some basic things. So I actually went ahead, took a break, and studied networking for a while, and came back and studied this one. again, there are other things. There's testing, pen testing, asset security. IAM is really, really big, particularly in the cloud field. Operations is, again, on the cloud side, strong. And software security, development security is something I was comfortable with. But again, there are many different places you can go. My typical week does not look anything like this at all. When I first joined the company, I was a chief security architect. I would say 50, 60% technical. Right now, if you can see here, most of my time, and of course, this changes. Some weeks I don't have any contracts. Some weeks I read contracts 80% of my time. I read a lot of contracts. I read a lot of security related things. I work with lawyers a lot, which for me is very interesting because that's something really out of my comfort zone. I learned a lot about laws and privacy laws. So that is something I find as a challenge and I really enjoy it. This part is not my favorite part. I answer a lot of security questionnaires because my company is a network software and hardware vendor. So we sell to big companies and they send a lot of security questionnaires and I am the main person who answers them. Again, I deal with incidents, I deal with meetings, routine tasks, I deal with vendors, which is, again, not my favorite thing to do, but that's part of the job. And my technical role is almost 10% at this point as a subject matter expert to different groups. And I also help sales and customer support when they are talking to a customer on issues related to security. I talk to the customers or our internal. Another question I get a lot is what background is best for a cybersecurity career? In my opinion, there is no such thing. I don't think there is a best background for cybersecurity in general. There are some backgrounds help you in certain parts of domains. For example, if you're a software engineer, if you have experience in software writing, software security probably is going to come to you easier because you understand the software part of things. Similarly, if you have a background in network engineering, then network security will be probably easy for you or easier. Again, I find lawyers and social scientists, political scientists, they learn the policy side of things easier than me, for example, but I try hard. Again, if you have a background in math and then cryptography, really, really hardcore cryptography is actually probably is going to make sense to you because there are a lot of proofs and math related to it. So a well-rounded security professional, in my opinion, can come from any background. I've seen many good security people from teachers, accountants, lawyers, English majors, engineers, all kinds of people become very successful and good security people. And the community is also, like, it is already very diverse. If you attend some of meetings, you will see very different people doing very different things. And that's what makes it very interesting for me personally, because it's never boring. You always meet some people that is totally different than you are, and you learn from them. That's why I like it. And I also see a lot of people who make career changes and move into cybersecurity. And arguably, even maybe I did that as well, because I was 100% software developer person who was writing security software. Then I actually switched my career and I became a full-time cybersecurity person who is doing not so many technical things anymore. I have a background in technology, so it helps for sure, but my day-to-day job actually does not have many technical things. So if you want to be in this business, I think the first thing you need is you have to be passionate about cybersecurity. That's a given, maybe in any job, but more so for here. You have to really enjoy learning new things because, again, we have new things coming up every day. Technologies, languages are changing, vulnerabilities are changing. This is a constantly learning and proving yourself kind of job. It's not a job that you would do the same thing for 20 years. Finally, you need good communication skills, or you want to work on them. I probably don't have the best communication skills. I work hard on it. I try to listen better. The reason I'm saying this is because our job by definition is creating conflict with other divisions, your IT or customer care, because security is always a burden in many people's eyes. It makes things harder. So you should really be good in communicating your ideas and points. Just making sure I'm not too late. So finally, certifications, diplomas, or degrees. I think they each have their own niche. I observe, and this is my personal opinion, employers seem to be looking for certifications lately. And I'm not just talking about cybersecurity, be it a PMP or others. I see a lot of people putting a lot of certifications, including myself, to their names, and there's a reason for that. Depending on the position level, sure, sometimes degrees, diplomas are required. But my suggestion to you is check job postings, as I mentioned before, see what they're looking for. Some of them will insist on a certification. Some of them will say it's nice to have, but they definitely help. Also consider that certifications can be a quicker and less expensive way to start your career if you want to make this switch. Particularly if you already have a degree and just want to just study, get an exam, and take your certification and try something new. However, degrees and diplomas take longer, but if you don't have any background in cybersecurity or maybe in a related field, they probably will give you a better foundation. You will take your time and understand some basic concepts, because most people like myself were already in a kind of related field and they build up some knowledge there, and then we made the jump. So for me, it was enough to get a certification, study 2 months and pass an exam. But if you don't feel comfortable, I think degrees, and there are a lot of postgraduate degrees or diplomas, they actually are quite well. Final slide is, how do I start? As I said, just start with a good research and research on what domains of cybersecurity you want to focus on. What is interesting for you? Do you want to write policies? You want to be a pen tester? You want to do cryptography stuff? You want to write software? I think that's the first things, and which fields are interesting for you. And then going from there, what education and or certifications will you need to get that job? And if any, maybe you don't, maybe you're good enough to go right now, but that is a good place to start, in my opinion. And then, as I did in networking, what additional learning should you do? I mean, do you need to go learn more about software or maybe networking before you actually make that jump? If you never did any technical job, you still can be a very good cybersecurity person. But I think you will have to learn some networking, some software, at least to the level that you can understand the security aspects of it. And reach out to senior people in the industry. As I committed to you, I am open. You can email me or you can find me on LinkedIn. Again, I know many people who are very, very, eager to help anybody in this field. Reach out to your peers, get opinions from your friends and whoever is in this business or they're trying to get into. There's very good communication there as well. And there are organizations, as I said, ISC Square, ISACA, conferences. There are all these groups. There are some peer organizations. You can really start socializing there, and you will get very valuable information from there. And finally, make sure your expectations are based on good information and you are realistic about your goals and timelines, because I meet people sometimes, they want to be a cybersecurity person. Actually, they apply for jobs, but they actually have no background whatsoever. I recommend them, you have to be honest with yourself. Are you able to do that job if you got that job? So I think if you know where you are and where you want to go, I don't see any problem at all. Anybody can be a cybersecurity professional. It is a very rewarding, good career. Thank you very much for your time. And as I mentioned, you can find me on LinkedIn. I have a pretty unique name. You can Google it and find me, and I'll be happy to help you. Thank you.
All right. Thank you very much, Cuneyt. This is a very insightful presentation. And for people online, basically, Cuneyt covered quite a lot of things. So he introduced, he talked a little bit about his background, his story, how he started, like a 20 years career journey, right? So Cuneyt, you came to Canada 1999?
Yeah, end of it.
Yeah, so you were 1 year earlier than me. I came to Canada 2000. But I can find a lot of similarity between us, the background. I also in the software development background, came to Canada as a software developer, start my first job in BMO as a Java developer. Then 20 years later, now we all in the cybersecurity field. So although the different angle to address that. So that's very interesting. You see how people kind of cross the domains, across the career path. And Cuneyt also talk about a lot of things. One is how he started, but then what is cybersecurity, or what is cybersecurity really about? What kind of major domains you have? He used IC squared to CISSP. Those are 8 domains. But I like also like what he put in his typical day, what kind of things he is doing. And surprisingly, you will find a lot of people think, non-technical people think cybersecurity is just a technical work, right? But really, if you look at how time allocation Cuneyt put there, actually most of them you're in the meeting, you're in the education, you need to review the contract, you need to manage those risks. Of course, he is in the director role. That's maybe different from when you just started, but you can see there's a lot of we call typical non-coding or non like typical technical jobs there, right? And after that, he also mentioned what kind of certification you can look at, and what kind of background if you want to start in this career, how do you enter the door, and some things you may want to pay attention to, and how do you connect with the industry expert. So there's a lot of information there. We record this session, so if you want to review some of the details, you have a chance to review his slides. And of course, connect with people like Cuneyt, because they've been in industries for years. So there's a really rich information you can explore from them. Of course, consider the time. You don't want to spend them like every day. And all right, so let's come to the interactive session, or we call it actually just a Q&A session. Because it's online, so I will pretty much like a facilitator, right? So on behalf of you, ask questions to Cuneyt, and myself also have some question. I'm also very interested to want to learn from Cuneyt. Take this chance. All right. So for people online, so it's your time also. So feel free to type your questions, submit your questions in chat or Q&A. We already have several great questions there, so I will start with that. I think one common question is for people just they even haven't started the career yet. They are looking into this field. So the typical challenge they will have is talk about the practical experience or work experience, right? So especially for people not in the cybersecurity domain before. So typically, company will ask you the job posting. You need to have this, that, or whatever. But people may only know the knowledge. They may know some vocabulary or keywords. They understand some basic concepts, but they never get a chance to really work on an end-to-end project. So what should we do then? So it's kind of like a chicken and eggs question. So this is a common question. So Cuneyt, what do you think?
I mean, that's a very good question. And, being immigrants, we had the exact same problem. Whenever you come here, do you have Canadian experience or any other experience do you have? And I observe, and I know because we have younger people in my company at BlueCat who were CISSP. They passed the exam. They were not officially CISSP, but after working a little bit, they build up their experience and got the certification. So I think that's probably the number one thing certifications allow you. I know all these employers asking for minimum experience, but I think certification is a good way to at least show that you are at a level that you can work on certain things. Other things you can do is there are, again, social organizations. Some people actually volunteer for this job. I mean, I know in ISC Square, people volunteer for schools and they do training. So, and there are actually many jobs that does not require a lot of experience. There are some, entry-level security positions, security analysts, and I think companies are eager to hire these people. So I know it's a hard problem, but getting a certification or a diploma or a degree actually could help. Just coincidentally, actually, a friend of mine teaches at University of Toronto. It's a cybersecurity diploma program. Tomorrow night, actually, I'm going to give him a hand because he has students. Every now and then he invites me to his classes and we do projects. Last semester, their final project, I was actually the jury. I actually listened to all different projects and provided them my input because since I'm in the industry and they're writing a school project, so there are ways that you can learn things in different educational programs.
Very cool. Yeah, so that's a great insight. So on one side, you can using the certification, preferable like a low certification more, you have a hands-on opportunities, right? So besides the concepts, and also looking for whatever practical, may not be big, maybe even volunteer work or maybe small things you can do. Really get your hands dirty, especially when you start, right? So you want to gain that a little bit. So it's a chicken and eggs. At some point, you have to break it. And a lot of people say, okay, I don't know how to do. But in fact, if you really want to do it, there's a tons of a way you can do it, right? Just like Cuneyt said, you can find all those like, online opportunities, the lab exercise, and also, for example, our experiential learning program as well. So it just, if you really want to do it, you will always find a way. And the big problem is some people use this one as an excuse to say, okay, I cannot get an experience, so I could not get a job. So then they basically do nothing. So that's the problem. So, but if you really want to do it, you always can find the small things to start first. All right, cool. So that's a great question. Second question I hear, I think this is Jenny. I think that's from Jenny. And the question is about, okay, feels like if you want to keep the cybersecurity like as a future career, Junior, you mentioned you want to be passionate about this one. But the passionate actually is a big word, right? So when you feel passionate about it, a lot of people say, okay, I don't know cybersecurity very well yet. How do I know I'm passionate about this? If I select this as my career path, how do I know I will do well in this field? So it's another chicken and egg thing. So what do you think?
That's a very good question, and I have some experience there. Again, I had 2 interns, and I hired 2 interns from a very good university, very good grades, and they were both very good students. They were very smart. And after spending 8 months as an intern, they actually found that cybersecurity was not for them. So I think it is important that that's why I mentioned that you should really understand what a typical day for a cybersecurity person is. Again, that was my day. If you are a pen tester, you will be pen testing products all day. So I know it is a big commitment, but what I'm saying is you should really do better research before, because I also have people saying that I really love cybersecurity. This is great. This is my dream job. But when I start talking to them, they actually don't know much about cybersecurity. I mean, I'm a big fan of the movie Matrix because that's why I put the picture in there. So, but that's not what we do. It's not even close. It looks very cool. You're a hacker. You're doing things. Sure, there are parts of cybersecurity. You could be a pen tester doing that kind of stuff. But that's exactly what I'm saying. I think before you determine you're passionate or not, did you do enough work? Did you do enough stuff in your home computer? This is actually my home lab. I actually have a couple of AI machines here, and nobody's paying me to do that kind of stuff. I actually run data because this is my passion. I know that because I've been doing this for years. So what I'm saying is that's exactly why you should research what is there, what are different things you can do in cybersecurity, and give them a go. Do some online classes, talk to people, come find me. When we can have coffee with me, and then maybe it's not for you. Maybe it's not as fun as you think it is, or maybe it's a lot more fun than you think it is. So that is exactly why I think being passionate means that you did your homework and actually figured it out ahead of time, and not joining this cybersecurity because you heard that it's a cool thing to do.
Yeah, that's great. So when I also look back, so every time when I was young, I always say, okay, I was passionate about certain things, but later I actually figured out is, okay, I'm really not that passionate about certain things. So now I really carefully use that word. I think I'm like myself is a person curious about a lot of things and maybe feel interesting about these things. But when I use the passionate, really is means I dedicate. I could, for example, I can dedicate even my whole time, like a weekend, like all those things. Really, so sometimes I don't even care about what I can get, but I just want to do it. So that's kind of things that are really passionate. But before you reach to that stage, you have to do it, because otherwise, how do you know? Right? So you have to do something. Doesn't matter is to consult with senior people, ask people, but at some point you also need to do it and get the feeling about yourself, right? So, for example, I never thought about that. Cuneyt, one of your major domain is like encryption. I was not good at math, so I never thought about that would be the something I like it or like I passionate about. But when I work in some project, in fact, I felt fascinated about encryption. All of a sudden, that's opened a new door for the new things. And not only the existing encryption, but also for the future thing like a quantum computing, how to make encryption quantum safe. So those are the things that fascinate. At the early stage, I never thought about the encryption. It will be something I'm interested in.
Yeah, I mean, just to close it off, yeah, I shared my background because my passions changed. I mean, I was passionate about a lot of things, and I still am. I still do astronomy. I still read a lot about, physics and stuff, but I chose that not to be my job, or music for that matter. I still do them, but what I do day in, day out, I spend 10, 12 hours a day. I want to do something that matters to me. I just don't want to do something just to make a living. I want to be excited about what I do. That's what I meant.
Yeah, that's so true. Yeah, also that's evolving, right? So your interest, just like what you said, uh, along your career journey, things change. The context change, environment change, your duty, your responsibility, or maybe your family, your environment change. So your passion is also evolving, right? So it's not like we fixed that one like 20 years ago. I always do that. So you also need to be adapt, right? So that's also the thing. Okay, great. You mentioned there are many domains in cybersecurity. One of the things I find cybersecurity is attract to me is it's very broad. When I started my IT or software development, I thought IT is a very broad industry. But nowadays, when I look back, I feel the cybersecurity even broader compared with IT because it covers things in your chart, right? So there's a risk and a security management, there's asset management, there's a compliance and regulatory things. So there are a lot of things related to process, to people, to technology. So from your angle, what do you feel? So from technical people, kind of right now you take a lot of responsibility for non-technical side things. What do you feel? So how that works? So sounds like a two different world.
Uh, they're actually not totally different because I believe uh, it has to be non-technical to start with because uh, what we do should matter. So I kind of, after years of studying and doing this job on the social side of things, all those controls, security controls, encryption, MFA, and stuff that we use, they should mean something. And I think it starts at the risk management level. So we should understand what my company is doing. We are a network software company. So the risk for us is very different than from a bank or a shoe manufacturer. So you cannot really have a list of things and everybody has to comply with all these controls and our job is to force it. So people like security people has to look at the business. What are we doing? For my business, the software is very important. Customer data is very important. But we don't trade. We don't exchange money. We don't have any credit card information. So I think that's why it is important to understand the non-technical part of it. But as we mentioned, and you mentioned as well, it is very broad. Like there are so many niches in this business. You don't have to understand and know it all. I know a lot of pen testers. All they do is pen testing. They are and they are specialized in certain platforms, specialized in certain languages. Some people actually hunt vulnerabilities. I see a lot of those. They actually try to find a vulnerability in a product and get famous for it. They have their web pages. So they're passionate about it. It's not something I'm interested in. Some people do operations, they do incident handling. Some people go to the security in the software side. So that's exactly why I think a good research is important, because when you go through these things, there's something for everybody. And you can always say, hey, I want to focus on this side of things. And you stay happy and you don't have to do a lot more. Networking, again, traditionally, most security people were network engineers. And many people still believe you're talking about security, it's a firewall rule. Sure, firewalls are important, but security is a lot more than setting up a firewall rule. And sure, you have to understand what that means, but it's not all about it. So there are many different ways to look at this.
Yeah, that's so true. And one thing fascinates me is also in cybersecurity or security in general, you can see people in different schools, kind of like they also carry their philosophies. So the more I observe people, they have their own styles. And but it doesn't mean this style is better than the other. Really is you have to find the style fit to your current environment, current business needs. So that doesn't mean this one must be used like everywhere. So you have to adapt that. And just like Cuneyt, you mentioned, there's so many domains, which good news is you can start, like there's multiple entry points, right? So you can enter to this field. So if you're non-technical people, you can start with a risk or compliance or like a policy or those areas. If you're technical people, or if you're on network side, you can start with network security. If you have software, you can start with application security, right? So there's a lot of angle you can enter to that. Great. I saw there's another question. I think a couple of people mentioned that related to certification, right? So certification, on one side, you learn the things, right? So that's good. You get knowledge. Hopefully, you also get certain hands-on experience. But on the other side is certification also takes time to finish, right? You study any certification. It may take you, depends on how big or small. Like for example, CISSP may take you half a year to finish that. And there's a program I saw some people comment on that. I think this is who the Sammy is from York University. There's a cybersecurity program also towards the CISSP. So you may spend like half a year or like almost a year on some like those big certifications. So for people just started, what kind of recommendation do you have? So some people also mention, oh, should I start in the CISM? Definitely, I don't think that will be the first one, but I'd like to hear your insight, Cuneyt. Yeah.
That's a very good question, and I'll go back to my personal opinion. So again, when I decided to go back from high frequency trading to security, actually my wife, who's a PMP project manager, she told me, why don't you go get a certification? And I was a bit insulted, like, hey, I have patents, I not know my stuff. What do you mean? Then she told me, well, it doesn't work that way. Why don't you go have a look at it? And then actually I figured out that I was wrong, because when I was working for CISSP, I understood that I know certain parts of cybersecurity well, but I was unaware of a good chunk of it. The certifications actually set the level. So they teach you every piece that you need to know to a level that is required for you to do your job. It's a big commitment. I totally agree. It took me months as well, and I actually took some time off just to write the exam. I was on a vacation. I just studied day in, day out. For CISM, it was a bit different. So it's a big commitment. But again, as I mentioned, if you are working already and if you want to switch, studying at your own pace is actually something you can do. If you have some background, again, I also want to give a warning that I meet people who do not have any background in computers or software. They don't know what Linux is. They never actually saw a network. I'm not saying they cannot be cybersecurity people. They can, but that's a longer learning experience for them. So I think it's a commitment for everybody, for me as well. It's the cost, not only to pass the exam. After the exam, you have to collect points. You have to pay fees. The more you have, the more you have to pay. So that's why I think a research is important before you start this path. Is this something you really want to do it? And there are a lot of online resources just to show you what is in a CISSP exam and what is in the book. I would just go through it, like spend a day or two just to see what are the things in that. Is that something you're interested in doing? I don't know if that was a good enough answer, but.
Yeah, so that's an excellent insight. Yeah, I like what you put there. So it costs you time, it costs you money to get a certification, not only before, but also after, right? So for people, I think Cuneyt, we kind of have quite many certifications. Just pay for those membership fee, right? So every year, it's not a small amount, right? So of course, if your company can cover that, that's different story. But just to maintain those one, and also to keep those continuing education credits, right? So that's also your dedication. I see a lot of people, they got whatever certifications, But after 3 years or 5 years, it just let them expire, right? So they just they don't want to pay more, or they lose the interest to keep that certification. It happens to a lot of people, right? So some like even for myself, there's some certification I didn't continue, but so from at the end of the day, really is a return of your investment, right?
Correct.
So what's the ROI, right? So that can help if you think from that angle, that form a better strategy. Well, I usually call it a learning strategy. You invest yourself. So, but then in that essence, you have to consider the ROI, return of investment. You think about yourself as a company. I invested this time and amount. What can I get, right? So, what kind of things can contribute to my bottom line? So that's the question you need to ask. All right, so that's a good, really good questions. But speaking of the certification, right? So CISSP actually is a quite senior professional certification, right? So before CISSP, it's because CISSP requires you have a 5 years professional experience. Are there any like a certification, kind of like a stepstone, right? So if I couldn't get CISSP in next several years, so what kind of things I can do in between?
Yeah, there are a lot of other certifications, and they're specialized too. First of all, most cloud vendors have certain cloud certifications. I mean, there is one for Amazon, AWS, and there are Google ones, Azure has. And I see actually a lot of people going that path because there is a lot of business moving to cloud, and that is a booming business. And if you're looking for a job, and that could be a good way to start. I'm not saying they're easier, but at least they're more focused. If that's what you're working on, switching from what you're doing to there might be a smaller jump for you. There are also more entry-level certifications. I don't have any of them, so I cannot really tell. But I know there are some network security certifications, many of them. And CISSP is probably one that you should not get first unless you already worked in the field for a while. RESILIA, it was something, as I mentioned, it's not very well, known in North America, but it was basically free for me, and that's why I got it. ITIL was trying to come into the North America. I think there are many different certifications, or maybe a diploma program. So that could be maybe a better option for you. As you mentioned, York University has one, UFD has one, I know for sure. I'm not sure about Ryerson, but they have 1-year programs which starts from the beginning and then builds up to it, which could be a good way to start for your real certification.
Yeah, so that's a great insight. And to add on that one, there's also like a meetups and like a small training or mini like trainings. So you can always tap into that. Another part is you can also hear some insights from professionals already in this field. So just like Cuneyt, you can get some guidance specific target to your domains, right? So because certification is actually, which certification is a good, it's a quite general question because we have to put your background into this context to understand, right? So to start. With that angle, there's a couple of questions related to which domain I should start, right? So I saw there people, I think, who is this one, Miss Rock. So he or she said here, I'm in the QA, I'm the quality control, quality assurance for 10 years. So where should I start if I'm interested in cybersecurity? And there's one more person actually before Judith, there's one more person also asked, I'm actually in biologic science. Sounds like not directly related to cybersecurity, but I'm learning a CISSP course right now. So, but which domain I should start? So what's your suggestion?
So again, first of all, you know the best. But if I have to make a guess, if I was in QA for 10 years, I'm already very used to the idea of like structured testing, test cases. I would say it is very similar to pen testing and that kind of stuff because there's a lot of scanning. Actually, some of our security people at BlueCat were from QA because I had a lab. I now handed off to the product team, but in that lab, we actually run pen testing on our products every week. And I work with QA people to do that. So they were the ones who set up the environment, put the systems in there, they upgrade them, they actually set up all these scanners. So I think there is a lot of alignment there, but it doesn't mean that that's what you should do. So again, look into other domains, but I would see testing, pen testing, application scanning, fast testing, that kind of thing might fit very well to the QA person. On the biology side, I minored on biology. Again, I was a hippie
Okay.
environmentalist. I got my engineering degree. I minored in biology. I actually did astronomy. I published papers. So the point is, what you do does matter very little. Our IT manager, IT director is biology grad. Again, there are many different people working in different fields, and what you studied at school does not matter much. I'm not saying that it does not matter at all, but finishing a university and learning, focusing on one thing definitely helps for you. Again, I would say the same thing, even for the QA person that asks, just read the domains. Try to understand what each domain does. Reach out to people like myself, have a phone call with them and ask them, what do you do in this thing? What does that person's job is? And then we will be happy to tell you, and then see if that's something you would like doing day in, day out. Another thing I did for Ryerson University is they had this shadow program, because I gave a speech there similar to this one about careers, and they reached out to me and they sent me a PhD student, and they said she's interested in cybersecurity. Can she shadow you for a day? So I made sure my day was more interesting than what I showed you. It was not just reading contracts, but I actually took her to meetings. We did handle incidents and different types of it. So there are many things you can do to understand, and if you see something that interests you, and then keep working on it and see if that's something that you want to switch to and make it your career.
Excellent. So I think you mentioned a great point. In fact, on one side, what do you already know, or what's your background is important in the way that's your starting point, right? So the easiest from ROI point of view, the best way is start with or something you're already familiar, so that will maybe save your time and effort. But on the other side, what do you know actually doesn't matter really is how do you get that knowledge is important. What I mean is the way of your the methodology of your learning, the way you acquire the new knowledge, and the way you can connect the dots together. That's actually very important to cybersecurity. And cybersecurity is a very broad domain. So oftentimes you have to cross domains and to kind of connect dots together. Oftentimes you cannot just using one way to address. You have to be flexible and also adapt to the current situation, which I think for people from, for example, from biological science way, it kind of like you may have your unique way of thinking things, right? So your framework of the things. So that's actually benefit what you're doing. Of course, you need to pick a domain to start first. And yeah, so until today, I actually have I have a PMP project management background, which helps me a lot to look at a lot of things. So at the end of the day, when I look at any cybersecurity program, I'm looking at time, cost, scope, and communication integration, and also how do you make things agile? And how do you bring the visibility reporting to the people? So that's actually those philosophy from project management can apply to cybersecurity. And in Cuneyt, I mentioned that in the early part of this talk, he has a talk on object-oriented way to look at policy management. That's actually cross-domain, right? So using the software development architecture to think about risk management, policy management. So that's actually give you the rich information and a very unique angle to look at things. So the power to cross domains to think differently and differentiate yourself from others. So that's actually very good. All right, we actually already reached to end of the session. We're already 8 p.m. We may just, if Cuneyt, are you okay? We run for 5 more minutes?
Oh, yeah, no problem.
Okay, so for people online, we will continue for 5 more minutes. So before we go, so Cuneyt, what's your kind of like last minute or departure advice to our audience for today? As I understand people from different background, but if you want to give one important message to the people, what do you want to say for people interested in cybersecurity?
Again, I will probably be repeating myself, but I have a son who's just going to university this year. So this is actually close to my heart because, again, we made a long decision. And he ended up choosing some major I have no idea about. And we wanted him to do what he likes to do best. So that is what I'm going to repeat here because, again, not all cybersecurity is the same. They're actually very different. And here's one thing. I actually was at RSA conference right before this COVID thing happened. I was in San Francisco. I was not presenting there, but I was listening. The first time they actually had a cryptography math session. It used to be more businessy, management, not very technical. They brought in PhD students from France, China. It was like math proofs. And it's so different than salespeople trying to sell you, penetration testing software. So my point is, cybersecurity is so diverse and big. There is something for everybody. That's my last probably advice would be take your time really to look into different parts of it. Don't assume it is just one thing. And again, get help, get engaged, and see if one part of it is actually interesting for you to pursue.
Wonderful. Yeah, cybersecurity is very broad. So just like Cuneyt covered in his presentation, there are 8 domains described in IC Squared 2. So if you're interested, just take a look at those 8 domains, try to understand what it's about and to see which one closer to what you are doing right now. Maybe you can start with 1 or 2 domains, right? So from there, that could be a quick way and also get some insights from people and connect with people. Back to several years ago, because I also switched my career from software development, project management to like a business management to cybersecurity. At that time, I didn't know too many cybersecurity. Actually, I know 0 cybersecurity professional at that time. But right now, I actually probably know lots of cybersecurity, at least in professional in Toronto areas. So I started the meetup. I started to join all those events and connect with people. Now I can kind of, whenever I need some insights, I can reach out to people like all through my connections to find out who are the best people in this field. So I can consult with them, get advice, right? So that's actually really important when you move towards your future career path. So that's actually a great message. Excellent. Thank you very much. So thank you very much, Cuneyt. It's a very good insight. And for people online, Cuneyt is also a very busy person, but he very kind to come to tonight to give us his insights. So let's all give him a big, like a virtual applause.
Thanks for having me, Brian. It was really a pleasure.
We want to wrap up for tonight's session. And also thank you, people online. So you spend your time for joining tonight's session. Rather than you have a lot of fun things to do, but you actually come to join the session for your future career development. That's actually great. And also kudos yourself. I hope this is also some ROI good for you for the future.